The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers at 11:47 p.m., clanging against the concrete driveway like a church bell announcing the end of everything I thought I knew. Pierce Eldrow, 43 years old, lying under a busted Dodge Ram that had more miles on it than my marriage had honest conversations. "Don't take it personally, Pierce." Kiera's voice drifted through the kitchen window above me, sharp and dismissive as always. The kids just bonded with their real father. Real father. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I rolled out from under the truck, wiping motor oil on my jeans, and peered through the gap in our kitchen blinds. There she was, my wife of 18 years, sitting at our oak table with a man I'd never seen before. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a polo shirt that probably cost more than my monthly insurance payment. Wine glasses caught the overhead light, and Kiera's laugh, the one I hadn't heard directed at me in months, filled the space between them. "Trey's been amazing with them," she continued, her voice carrying that tone she used when talking to her law firm partners. Professional, cold, calculated. Jenna actually said she wishes he was around more often. Jenna, my 17-year-old daughter who'd been giving me the silent treatment for weeks. Max, my 15-year-old son, had been distant too, but I'd chalked it up to teenage hormones and too much time on his gaming console. The stranger, Trey, leaned back in his chair, completely comfortable in my kitchen. "Kids know authenticity when they see it," he said, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey. "They can tell when someone actually cares about their future." I crouched there in my own driveway, eavesdropping on my wife's casual destruction of everything I'd built. 20 years of HVAC work, building my business from a rusty van and a toolbox into Eldrow Climate Solutions. 18 years of marriage, 2 kids I'd raised since they were toddlers, a mortgage we'd fought together to afford in this blue-collar neighborhood in Northwoods, Wisconsin. "Pierce never really understood them," Kiera said, swirling her wine. "He's always been more focused on his little repair projects than actually connecting with the family." Little repair projects. That's what she called the business that paid for her law school, her partnership track at Morrison & Associates, the family vacations to Door County every summer. I backed away from the window, my hands shaking, not from the November cold, but from something much deeper, something that felt like the foundation of my world shifting beneath my feet. Mrs. Crutchfield's porch light flicked on next door. The old woman had a sixth sense for neighborhood drama, and here I was, providing tonight's entertainment. I waved at her silhouette in the window, forcing a grin that felt like broken glass. Back under the truck, I tried to focus on the simple problem of a leaking transmission pan. Problems with solutions. Problems that made sense. But my mind kept replaying Kiera's words, dissecting them like evidence in one of her legal cases. The kids just bonded with their real father. When had this started? The late nights at the office that stretched into weekends, the new clothes, the expensive haircuts, the way she'd started holding her phone like it contained state secrets. I'd noticed, but I'd trusted. Trusted the woman who'd stood beside me at City Hall 18 years ago, promising to build something together. The kitchen door opened, and footsteps crunched across the frost-covered grass. "Pierce?" Kiera's voice had shifted to that careful, measured tone she used when she was about to deliver bad news. "We need to talk." I slid out from under the truck again, wiping my hands on a shop rag. She stood there in her silk blouse and tailored slacks, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread titled, "Successful Women Who've Outgrown Their Husbands." "Kind of late for a work meeting, isn't it?" I said, nodding toward the kitchen window where Trey's silhouette was still visible. Her jaw tightened. "That's what I wanted to discuss. I'm taking the kids to my sister's place in Milwaukee for a couple weeks. They need some space to process everything." "Process what, exactly?" "The changes in our family dynamic." She spoke like she was reading from a legal brief. "Jenna and Max have been struggling with the tension between us, and I think some time away will help them gain perspective." I stood there, transmission fluid dripping from my fingers, watching my wife deliver what sounded like a prepared statement. And what about my perspective? Don't I get a say in where my kids spend the next 2 weeks? They're not really your kids, Pierce. The words came out flat, matter of fact. Biologically speaking, and lately, they've been questioning why they should have to listen to someone who's not actually their father. The wrench I'd been holding slipped from my grip again, this time landing on my steel-toed boot. The pain was sharp, immediate, real, unlike the surreal conversation happening in my own driveway. "What are you talking about?" Kiera glanced back toward the kitchen, where Trey was probably listening to every word. "We'll discuss this when I get back. The kids and I are leaving in the morning." She turned and walked back toward the house, her heels clicking against the concrete like a countdown timer. I stood there in the November cold, staring at the warm light spilling from my kitchen window, watching a stranger make himself comfortable at my table. The neighborhood was quiet except for the distant hum of highway traffic and the occasional bark from the Hendersons' dog 3 houses down. 20 years of building a life, and it was unraveling faster than a cheap sweater. I picked up my tools and headed for the garage, my mind already shifting into the same methodical mode I used when diagnosing complex HVAC problems. Step 1. Gather information. Step 2. Identify the real issue. Step 3. Fix what could be fixed and replace what couldn't. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. The house felt different the next morning, like someone had sucked all the oxygen out of it while I slept. Kiera moved through our bedroom with military precision, packing suitcases with the efficiency of someone who'd been planning this moment for weeks. "Morning," I said from the doorway, coffee mug in hand, watching her fold clothes that I'd helped her pick out, paid for with overtime hours and weekend emergency calls. She didn't look up. "The kids are almost ready. We should be on the road by 10. Jenna appeared in the hallway behind me, dragging a suitcase that looked like she'd packed her entire life into it. She was 17, tall and sharp-featured like her mother, with the kind of confidence that came from growing up in a house where education and ambition were treated like religion. "Dad?" she said, and the word sounded strange coming from her mouth, like she was trying it on for size and finding it didn't fit anymore. "Mom explained everything to us last night." "Did she?" I stepped aside to let her pass. What exactly did she explain? Jenna exchanged a look with Kiera, one of those wordless communications that women seemed to master while men were still figuring out basic emotional vocabulary. "About how you're not really our biological father," Jenna said, her voice carrying that particular brand of teenage cruelty that could cut through steel. "About how we don't have to pretend anymore." The coffee mug felt heavy in my hands. "Pretend what?" "That we're this happy family when we're not." She hefted her suitcase and headed for the stairs. "Trey says it's healthier for everyone when people are honest about their relationships," Trey says. 2 words that explained everything I needed to know about how deep this rabbit hole went. Max appeared next, quieter than his sister, carrying a backpack and avoiding eye contact. 15 years old, skinny and thoughtful, the kid who used to help me with repair jobs and ask endless questions about how things worked. "Hey, buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You excited about this trip to Aunt Linda's?" He shrugged, still not looking at me. "I guess." "Max," Kiera called from upstairs, "did you pack your chargers?" "Yeah, Mom." I watched him head for the kitchen, noting the way he moved, like he was walking through a minefield. This kid who used to light up when I came home from work, who'd beg me to let him help with simple repairs, who'd chosen me for every father-son school event since kindergarten. Kiera came downstairs with 2 more suitcases, moving past me like I was furniture. Through the living room window I could see a silver BMW parked at the curb. Trey leaned against it, checking his phone, looking like he was waiting for a taxi rather than participating in the destruction of someone's family. "Nice car," I said. Trey manages the luxury division at Linden Motors, Kiera replied, not bothering to hide the pride in her voice. He's done very well for himself. Of course he had. And of course, she'd found someone who represented everything I wasn't: polished, professional, financially successful in ways that didn't involve crawling through attics and basements. The kids loaded their suitcases into Trey's trunk while I stood on my front porch, drinking coffee and watching my family prepare to drive out of my life. Mrs. Crutchfield was at her window again, probably taking notes for her next phone call to the neighborhood gossip network. "We'll be back in 2 weeks," Kiera said, pausing at the bottom of the porch steps. "Maybe we can all sit down and have an adult conversation about how to handle this situation going forward." "Handle the situation," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" She looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Pierce, you're a good man. You've been a decent provider, but these kids deserve to know their real father, and I deserve to be happy." "And Trey makes you happy?" "Trey makes me feel like I'm worth something more than fixing other people's broken appliances." That one hit its target. I felt something crack inside my chest, not my heart, because that was already in pieces, but something deeper. Something that had been holding me together for 43 years. I watched them drive away. Kiera in the passenger seat, the kids in the back, Trey behind the wheel of his expensive car. They looked like a real family, the kind you'd see in advertisements for vacation packages or life insurance. I stood on my porch until the BMW disappeared around the corner, then went back inside to the house that suddenly felt enormous and empty. But empty houses had advantages. They were quiet. They gave a man time to think, to plan, to understand exactly what he was dealing with. I spent the next hour going through Kiera's things, not snooping exactly, but conducting what she might call discovery in one of her legal cases. Her laptop was password protected, but she'd always been careless about leaving papers around. Bank statements, credit card bills, receipts stuffed into purses and jacket pockets. The picture that emerged was interesting. Expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of, charged to cards I didn't know we had. Hotel stays in Milwaukee and Madison on weekends when she'd claimed to be working late. Purchases at stores that sold the kind of clothes she'd been wearing lately. Silk blouses, designer shoes, jewelry that cost more than most people's monthly rent. All of it funded by credit cards tied to our joint accounts. My overtime hours, paying for her affair. I found her tablet in the bedroom, and because she'd never been particularly tech-savvy, it was still logged into her email. The messages between her and Trey went back 6 months, starting professional and gradually becoming personal, then intimate, then explicit. But the most interesting emails were the ones between Kiera and her best friend Danny Vega, real estate agent, divorced twice, the kind of woman who treated other people's marriages like entertainment. "You deserve so much better than Pierce," one message read. "He's holding you back from your full potential." "The kids are starting to see the difference between Pierce and Trey," Kiera had written back. "Jenna actually asked me why I settled for someone so ordinary." Ordinary. 20 years of marriage, and that's what I'd become. But the email that made me sit down hard in my desk chair was from 3 weeks ago. "Danny, I think I'm ready to make the move. Trey's been pushing for us to be more open about our relationship, and honestly, I'm tired of pretending. The kids barely tolerate Pierce anymore, and I can't keep living this lie just to protect his feelings. I've talked to the partners about increasing my caseload, and with Trey's income, we could easily afford the house payments without Pierce's contribution." I read that message 3 times, letting it sink in. This wasn't a spontaneous decision or a moment of weakness. This was a calculated plan, developed over months, designed to replace me systematically with someone she considered an upgrade. The kids barely tolerate Pierce anymore. I thought about Max helping me replace the water heater last month, asking questions about pipe fittings and thermal efficiency. I thought about Jenna, grudgingly letting me teach her to change a tire just 2 weeks ago, rolling her eyes but paying attention to every word. Had I been imagining the connection? Or had they been performing, playing the role of loving children while their mother and her best friend orchestrated my removal from their lives? I closed the tablet and sat in the silence of my empty house, listening to the furnace cycle on and off, the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the small sounds of a home that still needed maintenance regardless of family drama. Then I opened my laptop and started making lists: bank accounts, insurance policies, school contacts, utility bills, vehicle registrations, the endless paperwork of shared lives that would need to be untangled. But first, I needed to understand exactly where I stood legally. Kiera was a lawyer, which meant she'd been thinking about this situation from a legal perspective long before she'd bothered to inform me that my family was dissolving. I picked up my phone and called the one lawyer I knew personally, Jim Morrison, Kiera's senior partner at the firm. We'd met at company parties, shared enough conversations about sports and local politics that I considered him friendly, if not exactly a friend. "Pierce!" His voice was warm, genuinely pleased to hear from me. "How are you doing? How's Kiera?" "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about, Jim. Do you have a few minutes for some legal questions?" The warmth in his voice cooled noticeably. "What kind of legal questions?" "The kind that involve divorce and child custody in Wisconsin." A long pause. "Pierce, I think you should know that Kiera's been discussing some personal matters with the firm. We've advised her to seek independent counsel for any family law issues." "I see." I kept my voice neutral, professional. "And what kind of personal matters has she been discussing?" "I can't get into specifics, but she's expressed concerns about the stability of your marriage and her need to protect the children's best interests." Protect the children. From me. The man who'd raised them, supported them, been present for every school play and soccer game and late-night fever. "Jim, let me ask you something hypothetical," I said. "If a man discovered his wife had been systematically planning to leave him, using joint assets to fund an affair, and taking the children without his consent, what would be his best course of action?" Another pause, longer this time. "Hypothetically, that man would need to document everything, secure his financial interests, and file appropriate legal papers before his wife could establish grounds for abandonment or unfitness." "And how long would he have to do that?" "In Wisconsin, if she's claiming temporary relocation for the children's welfare, he'd have about 2 weeks before her actions could be construed as establishing a new custody arrangement." 2 weeks. The exact length of time Kiera had announced for their trip to Milwaukee. "Thanks, Jim. I appreciate the advice. Pierce, whatever's happening between you and Kiera, I hope you can work it out. You seem like a good man." "I am a good man," I said. "That's exactly the problem." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen, looking at the chair where Trey had made himself comfortable the night before, and started planning my next moves. Kiera thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She thought her law degree and her professional connections gave her all the advantages, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the man she'd decided to discard. I spent the next 3 days learning everything I could about Wisconsin family law, child custody statutes, and the legal definition of parental abandonment. The public library became my second home, and the reference librarian, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Patterson, seemed to understand that I was fighting for something important. "Divorce research?" she asked, pulling another stack of legal texts from the shelf. "Something like that." "My husband went through the same thing 15 years ago," she said quietly. "Ex-wife tried to relocate the kids without consent. The key is documentation and timing." I nodded, making notes on everything from financial disclosure requirements to the state's preference for joint custody arrangements. Knowledge was power, and I was building an arsenal. Meanwhile, I'd started my own investigation into Trey Linden. Social media made it easy. The man documented his life like he was running for office. Instagram posts from expensive restaurants, Facebook check-ins at luxury hotels, LinkedIn updates about his success selling high-end vehicles to wealthy clients. But the most interesting information came from a different source entirely. I'd called Linden Motors, claiming to be interested in a luxury SUV, and asked specifically for Trey. "Mr. Linden is currently on vacation," the receptionist told me, "but I can schedule you with another sales associate." "When will he be back?" "He requested 2 weeks off for a family situation. Very last minute, actually." Family situation. So Trey hadn't just happened to be available for Kiera's spontaneous trip to Milwaukee. This had been coordinated, planned, probably scheduled weeks in advance. I thanked the receptionist and hung up, adding another piece to the puzzle I was assembling. That afternoon, I drove to my bank, our bank, and requested detailed statements for all joint accounts going back 12 months. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Regular transfers to accounts I'd never authorized, charges for hotels and restaurants on days when Kiera claimed to be working late, cash advances that coincided with her girls' weekends that apparently included Trey. "Is there a problem with the accounts, Mr. Eldrow?" the bank manager asked. "Just conducting some financial planning," I said. "I'd like to understand our spending patterns." What I understood was that my wife had been systematically using our joint resources to fund her new relationship while keeping me in the dark about our actual financial situation. The numbers were staggering, nearly $15,000 over 6 months, charged to credit cards that I was legally responsible for but had never authorized. But two could play that game. I opened a new checking account in my name only, then spent the next hour calculating exactly how much of our joint assets represented my contributions over the past 5 years. Mortgage payments, utility bills, insurance premiums, car payments, all traceable to deposits from Eldrow Climate Solutions. The math was simple. I'd contributed roughly 68% of our household income during that period, while Kiera's salary had gone primarily to her personal expenses, student loan payments, and apparently funding her affair. I transferred my proportional share from our joint accounts to my new personal account, leaving enough to cover the mortgage and utilities for the next month. Legal, documented, and completely within my rights as a joint account holder. Then I canceled our family cell phone plan, which was in my name, and removed my authorization for any new charges to our joint credit cards. The next step was more complicated. I needed to establish legal documentation of Kiera's unilateral decision to relocate the children without my consent. Fortunately, she'd been careless about that too. Her text messages to me over the past 3 days painted a clear picture. "The kids are doing great here. Trey took them shopping for new clothes. Jenna says she doesn't want to come back to Northwoods. She likes the schools here better. Max is finally opening up about how unhappy he's been. I think this change is exactly what they needed." Each message was a gift, legally speaking. Evidence of her intention to permanently relocate my children without court approval, using my financial resources to establish a new household with her boyfriend. I forwarded copies of everything to my email, printed hard copies, and organized them chronologically. Then I called the one person I knew who specialized in family law, Rebecca Chen, a lawyer who'd handled my business incorporation 3 years earlier. "Pierce, good to hear from you. What can I do for you?" "I need representation for a custody matter, Rebecca. My wife has relocated our children without consent, and I believe she's planning to file for divorce with a request for sole custody." "How long have the children been relocated?" 5 days. She claimed it was temporary, but I have evidence suggesting otherwise. "Can you be in my office tomorrow morning? We need to move quickly if you want to protect your parental rights." The next morning, I sat in Rebecca's downtown office, spreading documents across her conference table like a general planning a military campaign. Bank statements, email printouts, text messages, photographs of Trey's car in my driveway, even Mrs. Crutchfield's sworn statement about observing unusual activity at my residence over the past several months. Rebecca reviewed everything with the methodical precision of someone who'd seen this scenario play out many times before. "This is good work, Pierce. Very thorough. Your wife's made several strategic errors." "Such as?" First, she relocated the children without filing any emergency motions or seeking court approval. Second, she's used marital assets to fund a relationship with a third party. Third, she's documented her intentions to permanently relocate in writing. She pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. We're going to file an emergency motion for temporary custody, a petition for the return of the children to Wisconsin, and a request for a restraining order preventing any further relocation without court approval. What are the chances? Given this evidence? Very good. Wisconsin courts don't look favorably on unilateral relocation, especially when there's evidence of adultery and financial misconduct. I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. Not for reconciliation, because that ship had sailed the moment Kiera decided I was ordinary, but hope for justice, for the chance to fight back against people who'd tried to erase me from my own life. There's one more thing, Rebecca said. You mentioned concerns about paternity? I pulled out the folder I'd been dreading to open. Kiera's been making statements about the children not being biologically mine. I need to know the truth. We can arrange for testing, but Pierce, you need to understand, in Wisconsin, if you've been acting as the children's father for their entire lives, biological paternity may not affect your legal standing. It's not about legal standing, I said. It's about understanding what I'm fighting for. She nodded. I'll set up appointments for this week. Confidential, court-admissible results. I left Rebecca's office, feeling something I hadn't felt since this whole situation started, like I had some control over my own life. Kiera had made her moves, played her hand, shown me exactly what she thought of our marriage and my role in her future. Now it was my turn. That evening, I sat in my empty house, eating takeout Chinese food and reviewing the legal papers Rebecca had prepared. Emergency motions, custody petitions, financial affidavits, the bureaucratic weapons of modern divorce warfare. My phone buzzed with another text from Kiera. Trey's been amazing with the kids. They're already talking about staying through Christmas. Maybe we should discuss making this arrangement permanent. I stared at the message for a long time, then typed my response. We should definitely discuss making some arrangements permanent. See you soon. I hit send, then turned off my phone and went back to reviewing legal documents. Kiera wanted to play hardball. She wanted to treat our marriage like a hostile corporate takeover, with me as the expendable middle management. But she'd forgotten something important about ordinary men like me. We knew how to fix things. And when something couldn't be fixed, we knew how to tear it down and build something better. The game was just getting started. The DNA results arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by certified mail to Rebecca's office. I sat across from her desk, watching her review the laboratory reports with the same clinical detachment she'd use for any other legal document. Pierce, she said finally, you need to prepare yourself for this. I'd already prepared myself for the worst-case scenario. 18 years of raising children who weren't biologically mine, of loving them and supporting them, and believing in a family that had been built on lies from the beginning. Just tell me. She turned the papers toward me. Max is your biological son. Jenna is not. I stared at the numbers and percentages that reduced 17 years of fatherhood to statistical probabilities. 99.97% certainty that Max carried my DNA. 0% possibility that Jenna did. So Kiera was telling the truth about Jenna? Partially. But Pierce, this doesn't change your legal relationship with either child. You've been their father in every meaningful way since birth. Wisconsin law recognizes... Who's Jenna's biological father? Rebecca consulted another page. The lab can't determine that without a comparison sample, but based on the timeline you provided, it would likely be someone your wife was involved with around the time of Jenna's conception. I thought back 18 years, to the early days of our marriage when we were both young and stupid, and thought love could conquer financial stress and career uncertainty. Kiera had been in law school, working part-time at a firm downtown, staying late to study and research cases, staying late with colleagues, male colleagues, Ambitious young lawyers who probably seemed more exciting than her HVAC technician husband. "There's something else," Rebecca said. "I had my investigator run a background check on Trey Linden, just to understand what we're dealing with." She handed me another folder. "He's been married twice before, both marriages ending in divorce with accusations of adultery. He's also got a history of targeting married women in financially stable situations." I flipped through the pages. Court documents, divorce filings, restraining orders. A pattern of behavior that suggested Trey wasn't just Kiera's midlife crisis. He was a professional homewrecker. His first wife was a real estate agent. His second was a marketing executive. Both had established careers and joint assets with their previous husbands. So this is what he does for a living? Apparently, it's more lucrative than selling cars. My phone rang, interrupting my review of Trey's romantic resume. Kiera's name appeared on the screen. "Pierce, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "There have been some issues with the credit cards." "What kind of issues?" "They're not working. The bank says the accounts have been frozen." I glanced at Rebecca, who was listening to my side of the conversation with professional interest. "I didn't freeze anything," I said. "I just removed my authorization for new charges and transferred my contributions to a separate account." "Your contributions?" Kiera's voice rose to that pitch she used in court when opposing counsel said something particularly stupid. "We're married, Pierce. Everything is joint property." "You're absolutely right, which is why I've filed papers to ensure everything gets divided fairly." A long silence. "What papers?" "Legal papers. With the court. You'll receive copies tomorrow." "You filed for divorce?" "I filed for emergency custody of our children, who were relocated without my consent. The divorce will come later." I could hear voices in the background, Trey saying something, Jenna asking questions. "Pierce, you're being ridiculous. The kids are happy here. They don't want to come back to that house, to that life." "Then they can tell that to the judge, along with you and Trey." "Trey has nothing to do with this." "Trey has everything to do with this. But we can discuss that when you're back in Wisconsin for the custody hearing." "What custody hearing?" "The one scheduled for Friday. You'll want to bring a lawyer, Kiera. A good one." I hung up and turned back to Rebecca, who was making notes on her legal pad. "How long before she realizes how much trouble she's in?" I asked. "Based on what I know about your wife's legal background, I'd say about 6 hours. She'll spend the first few hours thinking she can handle this herself, then she'll start making calls to family law specialists." "And what will they tell her?" "That she's made several critical errors and needs to return the children to Wisconsin immediately if she wants to avoid contempt of court charges." My phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Trey. We need to talk man to man. You're making this harder than it needs to be." I showed the message to Rebecca, who photographed it with her phone. "Evidence of third-party interference in a custody matter," she said. "Keep him talking." I typed back, "I'm listening." The response came quickly. "Kiera and the kids are happy. Why can't you just let them go? I can give them things you never could." "Such as?" "Stability, financial security, a father they can actually respect." I stared at that message for a long time, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. Not anger. Anger was hot and temporary. This was something else, something permanent. "Rebecca," I said, "I want to add a harassment claim to our filings." "Based on these messages?" "Based on whatever messages he sends next." I typed, "You're welcome to try. But you should know that I've been documenting everything for months. Bank records, hotel receipts, text messages, social media posts, everything." My phone stayed silent for several minutes, then rang. Kiera again. "What do you mean you've been documenting everything?" "I mean, I know about the credit cards, the hotel stays, the cash advances. I know about your emails to Danny. I know about Trey's background, his previous marriages, his pattern of targeting married women." You went through my private communications? I went through financial records for accounts that have my name on them. Everything else was just sitting on your tablet in our bedroom. Another silence. Pierce, let's be adults about this. We can work out a reasonable arrangement without involving the courts. We could have worked out a reasonable arrangement 6 months ago, before you started planning my replacement. Now, we'll let the judge decide what's reasonable. The kids don't want to see you right now. Forcing them to come back will just traumatize them. Then you should have thought about that before you told them I wasn't their real father. I never said that. You said they bonded with their real father. You said they didn't have to pretend anymore. You said they barely tolerate me. How do you know what I said? Because I was listening, Kiera. I was lying under my truck in my own driveway, listening to my wife explain to her boyfriend why our children don't need their father anymore. I could hear her breathing, processing the implications of what I'd just told her. We'll be back Friday, she said finally. But this conversation isn't over. No, I agreed. It's just getting started. After I hung up, Rebecca and I spent another hour reviewing our strategy for the custody hearing. Emergency motions, financial affidavits, evidence of misconduct, character witnesses who could testify to my fitness as a parent. What about Danny Vega? I asked. Kiera's friend who's been encouraging this whole situation? What about her? She's a real estate agent. She knows the local market, knows what our house is worth. What if this isn't just about Kiera finding happiness? What if someone's been planning to profit from our divorce? Rebecca looked up from her notes. Explain. Kiera gets the house in the divorce settlement, then sells it to move to Milwaukee with Trey. Who would she use as her real estate agent? Her best friend. Who would get a commission on a property sale that she helped orchestrate? Rebecca leaned back in her chair, considering the implications. That's a serious accusation, Pierce. Do you have any evidence? Not yet, but I know how to find it. That evening, I drove past Danny Vega's office, a small real estate firm in a converted house near downtown. Her BMW was in the parking lot and lights were on in the main office. I parked across the street and called her number. Danny Vega, Northwoods Realty. Hi, this is Pierce Eldrow. I'm interested in listing my house for sale. A pause. Pierce? Kiera's husband? For now. I understand you're the best agent in the area for handling divorce-related sales. I don't know what you mean. I mean properties that need to be sold quickly, quietly, with minimal complications. Properties where the owners are motivated to accept below-market offers. Another pause. I think you should discuss this with Kiera. I'm discussing it with you. What's your commission rate for a house worth about $250,000? Pierce, I don't think this is appropriate. 6%? 7%? Split between buyer and seller agents unless you're representing both parties? The line went quiet. Through the window of her office, I could see Danny at her desk, phone pressed to her ear, looking increasingly uncomfortable. I have to go, she said. I'm sure you do. But Danny, when this all comes out in court, and it will, remember that I gave you a chance to be honest. I hung up and drove home, adding another piece to the puzzle that was becoming clearer every day. This wasn't just about Kiera's midlife crisis or Trey's predatory behavior. This was about money, property, and the systematic destruction of my family for financial gain. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed I was too ordinary, too trusting, too naive to fight back. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of November wind that cut through your jacket and reminded you that winter was coming whether you were ready or not. I stood outside the courthouse in my best suit, the one I'd worn to Jenna's graduation last spring, watching Kiera emerge from a black sedan with Trey and the kids. She'd hired representation, just as Rebecca had predicted. A sharp-looking woman in an expensive coat who moved like she owned the building. Behind them, Jenna walked with her chin up and her shoulders set, ready for battle. Max trailed behind, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "Mr. Eldrow?" A young man in a court officer's uniform approached me. "Judge Harrison is ready to see all parties in chambers." Judge Harrison turned out to be a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd heard every lie and excuse in the book. She reviewed our filings while we sat in uncomfortable silence, me and Rebecca on one side, Kiera and her lawyer on the other, the kids in chairs against the wall. "Ms. Morrison," the judge said to Kiera's attorney, "your client has relocated minor children across state lines without consent from their legal father. How do you justify this action?" "Your Honor, my client removed the children from what she believed to be an unstable household situation. Mr. Eldrow has exhibited increasingly erratic behavior, and the children expressed fear about remaining in his custody." Judge Harrison turned to me. "Mr. Eldrow, how do you respond to these allegations?" I stood, feeling the weight of 18 years of fatherhood in my chest. "Your Honor, I've never raised my voice to those children, never laid a hand on them, never given them any reason to fear me. If they're afraid, it's because they've been told to be afraid. Can you elaborate?" Rebecca handed me a folder. "Your Honor, we have documented evidence that Mrs. Eldrow has been systematically alienating the children from their father while conducting an extramarital affair. We also have evidence of financial misconduct and third-party interference in the custody arrangement." I watched Kiera's face as Rebecca presented our evidence. Bank statements showing the unauthorized transfers, hotel receipts, text messages between Kiera and Trey, emails discussing plans to relocate permanently. "Furthermore," Rebecca continued, "we have evidence suggesting that this relocation was planned in coordination with Mrs. Eldrow's romantic partner, who has a documented history of targeting married women for financial gain." Kiera's lawyer objected, but Judge Harrison held up a hand for silence. "Ms. Morrison, does your client dispute the authenticity of these financial records?" "Your Honor, marital assets were used for legitimate family expenses." "Hotel rooms in Milwaukee constitute family expenses?" A long pause. "My client's relationship status doesn't negate her concerns about her children's welfare." Judge Harrison turned to Jenna and Max. "I'd like to speak with the children individually." What happened next was the hardest part. Watching my daughter, the girl I'd taught to ride a bike, helped with algebra homework, driven to soccer practice for 12 years, tell a judge that she didn't feel safe living with me anymore. "He's been acting weird," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Angry all the time. Mom says he's having some kind of breakdown." "Has he ever threatened you or your brother?" "Not exactly, but he's been watching us, like spying on us, and he got really mad when Mom started working late." Judge Harrison made notes, then called Max into chambers. My son looked smaller than his 15 years, hunched in the chair like he was trying to disappear. "Max, do you feel unsafe living with your father?" He glanced at Kiera, then at me, then at his hands. "I don't know." "That's an honest answer. Can you tell me why you don't know?" "Because everyone keeps telling me different things. Mom says Dad's been acting crazy, but he seems the same to me. Trey says I need a real father figure, but Dad's been my father my whole life. I just want everyone to stop fighting." I felt something break loose in my chest. This kid, caught between adults who were supposed to protect him, forced to choose sides in a war he never asked for. "Max," Judge Harrison said gently, "if you could live anywhere you wanted, where would that be?" He looked directly at me for the first time since walking into the courthouse. "Home. In my own room. With my dad." Judge Harrison called us back into chambers for her ruling. "This court finds that Mrs. Eldrow has violated Wisconsin custody statutes by relocating minor children without consent. The children will be returned to their father's custody immediately, pending a full hearing on permanent arrangements." Kiera's lawyer started to object, but the judge continued. Furthermore, this court is concerned about evidence of parental alienation and third-party interference in this case. Mrs. Eldrow, you will have supervised visitation rights pending psychological evaluation of all parties. Your Honor, Kiera said, speaking for the first time, this is ridiculous. I'm their mother. You're their mother, but you've demonstrated poor judgment in prioritizing your personal relationships over your children's stability. Mr. Linden, she turned to Trey, who'd been sitting quietly in the back of the room, you are hereby ordered to have no contact with these children pending resolution of this case. Trey started to stand, but Judge Harrison's bailiff moved closer to him. That includes social media contact, text messages, and presence at any location where the children might be present. Outside the courthouse, Kiera cornered me while Rebecca was arranging transportation for the kids. You think you've won something here? She said, her voice low and furious. This is just the beginning, Pierce. I'll fight you for every dollar, every possession, every memory of our marriage. You already took the memories, I said. You turned them into lies. Those kids will never forgive you for this. I looked over at Max, who was standing beside Rebecca's car, waiting to go home. One of them already has. Jenna approached us, her face flushed with anger. Dad, this is so unfair. You're ruining everything. I'm trying to keep our family together. We're not a family anymore. Mom and Trey and Max and me, that's a family. You're just the guy who won't let go. The words hit me like physical blows, but I kept my voice steady. Jenna, I know you're angry. I know this is confusing, but I'm still your father, and I still love you. You're not my father, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. My real father is someone who actually cares about what makes me happy. She turned and walked toward Kiera's car, where Trey was waiting despite the judge's order. I watched them drive away, Kiera and Jenna and Trey, looking like the family I'd been replaced by. Max climbed into Rebecca's car, quiet and thoughtful, processing everything that had just happened. You okay, buddy? I asked as we headed home. Are you and Mom getting divorced? Probably. Is Jenna really not your daughter? I thought about the DNA results, about 18 years of bedtime stories and school conferences and father-daughter dances. Biology isn't everything, Max. Love is what makes a family. But she doesn't love you anymore. No, I don't think she does. He was quiet for a long time, watching the familiar streets of our neighborhood pass by. I still love you, Dad. I love you too, son. That night, Max and I ordered pizza and watched a movie, trying to pretend our family hadn't just imploded in a courthouse. But the house felt different now, not empty like it had been for the past 2 weeks, but damaged. Like something had been broken that couldn't be fixed. My phone rang around 10 o'clock. Danny Vega. Pierce, we need to talk. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? Neutral location? Why would I want to do that? Because there are things about this situation that you don't understand. Things that Kiera doesn't know either. I thought about hanging up, but curiosity won. Where? The diner on Highway 51. 10 o'clock. She hung up before I could respond. I sat in my living room, looking at family photos that would need to come down soon, wondering what other secrets were waiting to be revealed. The custody battle was over, but the war for my family was just beginning, and I was starting to suspect that Kiera and Trey weren't the only enemies I'd been fighting. The Highway 51 diner was the kind of place that served coffee strong enough to jolt you awake and still had the same vinyl booths from 1987. Danny was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug as if she were trying to soak up its warmth. She looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. When she saw me, she gestured to the seat across from her. Thanks for coming. I slid into the booth, studying her face for signs of deception. You said there were things I didn't understand. There are, She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. But first, I need you to know that I never intended for things to go this far. How far did you intend them to go? She opened the envelope and spread several photographs across the table. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, bank statements, all documenting Kiera's affair with Trey. I've been following them for 3 months, she said, documenting everything. I stared at the evidence, confused. Why? Because Kiera is my best friend, and I wanted to protect her from making the biggest mistake of her life. Protect her? You've been encouraging her to leave me. Danny laughed, but there was no humor in it. I've been playing a role, Pierce, telling her what she wanted to hear while gathering evidence of what Trey really is. She pulled out another set of documents. Trey Linden isn't just a car salesman with a history of affairs, he's a con artist. His real name is Troy Lindstrom, and he's wanted in 3 states for fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement. I picked up one of the documents, a police report from Minnesota describing a scheme where Troy had seduced a wealthy widow, convinced her to liquidate her assets, then disappeared with over $200,000. His pattern is always the same, Danny continued. Target married women with stable finances, seduce them away from their husbands, gain access to their assets, then vanish once the money's gone. And you've known this for how long? 6 weeks. I hired a private investigator after Kiera started talking about leaving you for him. I thought if I could prove he was bad news, she'd come to her senses. I studied the woman across from me, trying to understand her motivation. But instead of telling her, you decided to let her destroy our marriage? I tried to tell her. She wouldn't listen. She said I was jealous, that I couldn't stand to see her happy. Danny's voice cracked. She accused me of trying to sabotage her relationship because my own marriages failed. So you decided to document everything instead. I decided to let her make her own mistakes while making sure there was evidence to protect her when it all fell apart. I looked at the photographs again. Kiera and Trey at expensive restaurants, holding hands across candlelit tables, looking like people in love. She doesn't look like someone who's being conned. That's what makes him good at it. Look at this. Danny showed me a series of bank statements. 3 weeks ago, Trey convinced Kiera to co-sign for a loan against your house, $50,000, supposedly for a business investment. My coffee went cold in my hands. What business investment? A luxury car dealership in Milwaukee. Trey told her they could be partners, build something together. The money was supposed to be a down payment on inventory. And? The dealership doesn't exist. The business license is fake. The $50,000 went into an account that Trey emptied 2 days ago. I felt the world shift beneath me, like standing on ice that was starting to crack. Kiera doesn't know? She thinks the money is sitting in a business account, earning interest. Trey's been showing her fake statements, telling her they're waiting for the right moment to make their move. Why are you telling me this? Danny met my eyes for the first time since I'd sat down. Because tomorrow morning, Troy Lindstrom is going to disappear. He's already given notice at the car dealership, told them he's relocating to Florida for family reasons. His apartment lease expires at the end of the month, and he's been selling his furniture. And Kiera? We'll be left with nothing. No boyfriend, no money, no marriage, and 2 kids who've been turned against their father. I sat back in the booth, processing the implications. You could have prevented this. I could have tried. But Kiera made her choice, Pierce. She chose to believe a stranger over her husband of 18 years. She chose to use your joint assets to fund an affair. She chose to turn your children against you. So this is justice? This is consequences. I gathered up the photographs and documents, stuffing them back into the envelope. What do you want from me? I want you to decide whether to save her or let her fall. Why would I save someone who tried to destroy me? Because she's the mother of your children. Because 18 years of marriage should count for something. Because you're a better person than she is. I stood up, envelope in hand, looking down at the woman who'd been playing puppet master with all our lives. And what about you, Danny? What do you get out of this? I get to live with the knowledge that I let my best friend ruin her life because I was too proud to fight harder to save her. I left her sitting in that diner booth, staring into her coffee cup like it held answers to questions she was afraid to ask. The drive home gave me time to think about choices and consequences, about the difference between justice and revenge, about what kind of man I wanted to be when this was all over. At home, Max was in his room, doing homework and pretending his world hadn't been turned upside down. I knocked on his door. "Hey, Dad. How was your meeting?" "Complicated. Can we talk?" He set aside his textbook and gave me his full attention, the way he'd always done when I had something important to say. "Max, I want you to understand something. Whatever happens between your mother and me, whatever choices she's made, none of this is your fault or your sister's fault. I know. And no matter what anyone tells you, you're my son. Biology, DNA, legal papers, none of that matters as much as the fact that I've loved you since the day you were born." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Dad, is Mom in trouble?" I thought about the envelope on my kitchen table, about Trey's planned disappearance, about the choice Danny had laid before me. "Yeah, buddy, I think she is." "Are you going to help her?" That was the question, wasn't it? After everything she'd done, everything she'd said, every way she'd tried to erase me from my own life, was I going to save her from the consequences of her own choices? "I don't know yet." "I think you should." "Why?" "Because that's what dads do. They protect their families, even when their families mess up." I looked at my 15-year-old son, wise beyond his years, and realized that somewhere in the wreckage of my marriage, I'd raised a good man. "You're right," I said. "That is what dads do." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Danny's evidence spread before me, staring at my phone, knowing I had until morning to make a choice that would define the rest of my life. I could let Trey disappear with the money, let Kiera face the consequences of her betrayal alone, let justice take its course. Or I could make one phone call and save the woman who'd tried to destroy me. The phone felt heavy in my hands as I scrolled to Kiera's number. Outside, November wind rattled the windows of the house we'd bought together, the house where we'd raised our children, the house that might soon be sold to pay for her mistakes. I thought about Max's words, about what kind of father I wanted to be, about what kind of man I was underneath all the hurt and anger. Then I made my choice and dialed the number. 6 months later, I was installing a new HVAC system in a downtown office building when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. "Pierce, it's Kiera." I set down my tools and walked to a quiet corner of the construction site. "How are you doing?" "Better. The therapy is helping, and I've been sober for 90 days now." After Trey's disappearance, which I'd prevented with a single phone call to the police, Kiera had fallen apart completely. The realization that she'd been manipulated, that she'd nearly lost everything for a man who'd never loved her, had sent her into a spiral of depression and alcohol abuse that required professional intervention. "That's good to hear." "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for calling the police that night, for stopping him before he could disappear with the money." "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do. After everything I put you through, you still saved me. I don't understand why." I looked out the window at the busy street below, watching ordinary people go about their ordinary lives, and thought about the choice I'd made that night. Because Max asked me to, because that's what fathers do. "The kids miss you." "I miss them too." "Jenna's been asking about you. She wants to apologize, but she's afraid you won't forgive her." "There's nothing to forgive. She was 17 years old, caught in the middle of adult problems. That's not her fault." A long pause. "Pierce, do you think we could ever—" "No," I said gently. "We can't go back, Kiera. Too much has happened." "I know. I needed to ask. But we can move forward. We can be better co-parents. We can show our kids that people can make mistakes and still treat each other with respect. I'd like that. After I hung up, I went back to work, thinking about second chances and the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. I'd saved Kiera not because I wanted her back, but because destroying her wouldn't have fixed what was broken in our family. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago. Kiera kept the house, but had to refinance to pay me my share of the equity. I'd bought a smaller place closer to downtown, with a workshop in the garage and a guest room for Max's weekend visits. Jenna had started coming around too, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, as she realized I wasn't going to punish her for the things she'd said during the worst of it. She was still my daughter, biology aside, and I was still her father in all the ways that mattered. My business had grown during the chaos of the divorce, maybe because focusing on work was easier than thinking about everything I'd lost. Eldrow Climate Solutions now had 3 trucks and 2 employees, and I was considering expanding into commercial refrigeration. Mrs. Crutchfield still watched everything from her front window, but now she waved when she saw me. Apparently, being the neighborhood's most dramatic divorce had earned me a certain amount of respect. That evening, I met Rebecca for dinner at a restaurant downtown. What had started as a professional relationship had gradually become something more personal, built on mutual respect and shared understanding of how complicated life could become. "How did the call with Kiera go?" she asked. "Better than expected. She's doing the work, getting healthy." "And how are you doing?" I considered the question. 6 months ago, I'd been a man whose world was falling apart, who'd discovered that everything he thought he knew about his life was wrong. Now I was someone who'd survived that destruction and built something new from the pieces. "I'm doing fine," I said, and realized I meant it. Just fine? Better than fine. I'm doing good. Later that night, I sat in my new kitchen, reviewing invoices and planning the next day's service calls. My phone buzzed with a text from Max. "Dad, can we work on that engine rebuild this weekend? I think I figured out the carburetor problem." I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. See you Saturday morning." Outside, spring rain tapped against the windows of my smaller, quieter house. No drama, no secrets, no one plotting to replace me with someone more successful or exciting. Just the ordinary life of an ordinary man who'd learned that sometimes the best revenge is building something better from the wreckage of what you've lost. I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, thinking about carburetors and custody schedules, about second chances and new beginnings, about the difference between the family you're born into and the family you choose to build. Tomorrow would bring new problems to solve, new systems to repair, new challenges to face. But tonight, for the first time in months, I was exactly where I belonged, in my own house, in my own life, with my own choices. And that was enough.